Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I am going to be doing another library check-in video where I will be going over like the books that I talked about in my last library check-in, like what books I had checked out at that point and have actually read or maybe not read, and then I'm going to go over what I have checked out right now, so what will probably be making up the bulk of my reading for the next month or two. I feel like I'm really kind of struggling with the pace at which I have been like checking out books from the library recently. I feel like I have been putting a lot of things on hold, and then like they all come in and then I have a stack of books and then I'm just like kind of overwhelmed by how much I want to read and like how much I need to read to be able to get all of these books read. And so obviously, you know, not all of them get read. That's the beauty of the library. And that has been something that I have been noticing more and more as I do these library check-in videos. I talked about it a little bit last time as well. This month, to kind of deal with that, I've decided to actually suspend a lot of my holds for a while so that I can both kind of just like calmly deal with the books that I have checked out right now, and then maybe even get to some of the books that I have on my shelves at home that I own, because that has been a backlog of books that I have been wanting to read for a while. I do still have a few holds that I'm gonna like allow to come through because they're books that I think I will read pretty quickly as soon as I get them, but otherwise most of them I am just suspending so that I can deal with what I have. So as usual, I'm gonna start by going over the books that I talked about in my last video that I had like checked out from the library and still not read yet. The first one is The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I actually did a full video review discussion thing on this with Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I enjoyed The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. I do have some caveats around that, both in terms of some rapey stuff that happens in the books. Well, predominantly that, and that's a thing that comes up in Invisible Life. It's a thing that comes up in Vicious, and I talk about that more at length in my discussion video. But there is something about V.E. Schwab's writing and her like approach to dealing with like structure and stuff that I just find really interesting. And because those were the first two books of hers that I had read, I kind of wanted to talk about things that were very similar but different about them. So check that video out if you want to hear more on my thoughts on The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. Next up is The Return of the Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. This is the last book in her Thief series, which is a series that has been going on for like a really long time. Like I am pretty sure I remember being in elementary school and having it be like on the list of having the first book in the series, The Thief, be on the list of like Newbery Award winners that we could read for our like Newbery book club thing or whatever they did to incentivize us to read. So it has been going on for a very long time, which might make you think that there are a lot of books in the series. There are not. I believe this last book might be the 6th or 7th book in the series. It's just that at one point she took a long break from publishing or releasing new books for whatever reason, and so she finally published the last book this year, and I was really excited to read it. The trade-off is that I picked up this book with like not having like revisited the other books in the series that recently, so there are a lot of aspects to it that I did not fully remember. The Thief series is set on this sort of like Mediterranean, Greco-Romanesque kind of like setting of like politics, but with like gods and thievery. Like there is religious thievery in this book, but it is all for the sake of a greater political cause. It's a series that I have always really loved because it is just so good at how it handles politics and twists and like these very complicated characters who are like, you know, they've got their own forms of arrogance or insecurity or like the things they're balancing as leaders or just like in the world of the gods that they're dealing with. And so it's a series that also like now looking back I'm really fascinated by because it is geared towards a younger audience, but like it has all of these things about power and leadership that like are, you know, very salient for like an adult audience. Like especially as the characters in the books get older, these later books in the series feel much more adult, even if they are not like explicit in any way. And so I really enjoyed this last book for like the self-contained story that it had, but I also knew while I was reading it that if I had just been more patient and revisited the whole series before I picked up this last book, I would have probably loved it much more, because I think there were a lot of things with the politics and, you know, the character trajectories where this book is wrapping up so many arcs that I couldn't fully appreciate the way all of these arcs were being wrapped up because I did not remember all of the finer details of some of these like characters and the betrayals and like the redemptions and all of these things. Like I couldn't fully remember everything that had happened. And so if you haven't read the series, you might kind of be like, duh, Deboki, like what did you expect? You picked up the last book without revisiting the previous books. But I remember like when I posted my video, my last library check-in, and I talked about this series, I got like a few comments from people who were like, oh my god, I like completely forgot about that series. Or like, you know, they had read the series when they were younger, but then kind of lost track of it. Again, there's that long break in when books were being released. So I hope that, you know, maybe you understand, are sympathetic to the fact that like part of me like knows, yes, I should have read all of those books, but part of me just like wanted to know what was going to happen. And so that is where I made my choice. And I am still really glad that I read it because I wanted to like know what happens. And I think it'll be fun to revisit the series now, knowing what the like end game for all of these characters are, like knowing what their kind of destination is. It's kind of like spoiling myself for the ending of a book that technically I have already read, but I've like forgotten like most of. So next up is Written in the Stars by Alexandra Fleur. This is a romance. It's very like rom-com-y, very contemporary romance, and like a lot of what I think is like very popular in the contemporary romance world right now. And it's about these two women who are just kind of like, they go on a date, it's pretty disastrous, but like for reasons of their own. Like one of the woman's boss is the other woman's brother, and he has set them up, and like to appease him, to figure things out. Like there's stuff going on that's complicated on both of their sides in terms of like one's coming out of a bad relationship, one is dealing with family who are constantly underestimating her. Like for those reasons, they decide that they need to pretend to date each other. And of course, as all of these fake dating stories go, fake dating becomes real dating. And then, you know, the things happen, the hijinks ensue. I thought this book was really cute, but it's also a book that I don't really feel like I have a whole lot to say about, and I don't think it's really gonna stick with me. I think it's sweet, and that is kind of the extent to which I have thoughts about it. I think for me, I am just realizing that like fake dating is a trope that like doesn't do a whole lot for me. It can be really good, but I think you have to do more than just like, hey, we're gonna pretend to date each other, post some pictures on social media, and then like kiss each other and it's gonna be confusing. Because like kissing each other, it's confusing no matter whether or not you're fake dating or not, right? Like, well, okay, no, kissing in general is not confusing, but kissing in an ambiguous dating situation, confusing, right? And so, I don't know if that makes any sense, sorry. The point is just that like, fake dating itself is just like, not a thing I find very interesting most of the time. Again, I don't have a lot to say about that. I am like deeply willing to like navel gaze all of my explanations for any trope I love or don't love. I don't have a whole lot of reasons for why I don't like care about fake dating, because I think for the most part, I'm really just kind of ambivalent to it. I don't hate it. I just don't really ever find it super interestingly employed in books, and this is kind of the same situation for me. I do have a theory about fake dating in contemporary romance, and I am basing this theory on a completely unproven premise. I don't know if my assumptions going into it are even remotely correct, but I feel like there has been a rise in the popularity of fake dating. Maybe, I don't know. If there is a rise in the popularity of fake dating in contemporary romance, I think it is connected to also the rise of social media. Like the fact that we now have all of these ways to manifest a fake relationship in the world. Like there are just so many more ways to like pretend to be dating someone now on the internet. Like I guess when I was younger, it would be like what, like maybe you'd like make someone your like top 8 on MySpace, or you'd like, you know, say you're in a relationship with someone on Facebook. But now like, you know, with Instagram, YouTube culture, like all of this stuff, there are a lot of ways to pretend to be dating someone on the internet that like add a lot of layers in terms of having an audience and all of this stuff. Even if it's just like posting on your personal Instagram account or tweeting something, and like, you know, you can then pretend to like your boss or your brother, like that you are dating the person that they have set you up with. Like, I guess that is a thing that like, even in like, you know, like yes, fake dating is not exclusive to contemporary romances, but it's a thing that you're not gonna get in like a fake courtship story set in the Regency era or something like that, right? So I think there's something there, but I also think that I'm full of shit because I am basing this solely on the fact that this is a thing that I think exists in contemporary romances and the fake dating trope, but not a thing that is like causative in any way. It's just a correlation built on no numbers whatsoever. So do not trust this. I am just putting it out there because it is a thing that occurred to me today and I want to tell somebody. It's possible that there's a bias on my end where I think that there is a rise in the fake dating trope just because I have realized that increasingly that I do not like the fake dating trope. So maybe that is the actual correlation, the actual causation is like, I think this, therefore I think that, but I don't know. I don't know if that's what's happening. Whatever. I'm gonna leave this be. So I had another book that I had on my list last time that I was like a little bit unsure if I was gonna get to or not, and then I actually decided not to read it. Was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and I did not have a strong reason for not reading it. It was already a book that I was kind of like lower on my list interest-wise. It's really more just that like a lot of people have been like talking about it, and it's a book that I know I want to read eventually because I like Naomi Novik's books, but I've also had some hesitancy about because of some of the conversations going around, some of the characterization and like depiction of other cultures in the books. It is still a book that I want to read. The problem that happened for me is that I got to a point where I had both A Deadly Education due and then the next book that I'm going to talk about, Black Sun by Rebecca Rohnhorse, I also had that due at the same time, and I needed to read one of them. I had to prioritize one, and I decided to prioritize Black Sun and just return A Deadly Education without reading it for now. And I think I made the right choice because I really, really loved Black Sun. This is a fantasy story inspired by pre-Columbus indigenous cultures in the Americas, and I think it's just so well written. Like it's just so, it kind of had like sort of like that thing that I liked about V. Schwab where she jumps around in time and stuff. This jumps around a lot in time and perspective, but in a way where like you are always drawn into whatever part of the story that you're in. Like you're always just like consumed by the immediacy of what's going on and how it fits in with the piece that you just read. And there were just so many things in the descriptions and the different characters and seeing how they all fit together that I was just like super in love with. I got to the end and was like, I would like the sequel, and also I really want the television show. Like there needs to be a TV series based on this because I just feel like visually it would be so good that I just like, I want both combined. I want that story and I want the visuals. I want it all together. My one quibble, and this is really not a criticism of this book in particular, but it's something that I was thinking about because of some of my feelings about S.A. Chakraborty's series, the City of Brass, the Devabad trilogy, which is that when I read that trilogy, one of the feelings that I had was that the first book and a half were really all just like setup for what would actually become the eventual story. And really the first book in particular, like it is building up to a certain point that like it's almost like a completely different book from the second two books, because the point at which it ends is like really the real crux of the matter. Like what happens at that end point is what like defines the entire rest of the story. And so like everything that happens in that first book, it's not like it's irrelevant, but it just feels so stretched out compared to like the importance of that ending relative to everything else that happens in the book. And also it means that that book is in no way kind of like an arc that stands on its own. Black Sun, like I can't say for sure if that's going to be the case because I don't know what the other books in the series are going to look like, but it definitely is a book that builds to its most important point that like is basically within the last 5 pages. Like, you know, like one of those books where the things all come together right at the end and it ends. And so it all feels like very much like this book is setting up the arc, the conflicts, the world that are going to be like important later on, like not necessarily just in the crux of this book. Like it is important in the crux of this book because there's this whole event called the Convergence that like everything is clearly building to. Like we have countdowns to the convergence, we have characters going towards things, like there are journeys that are all building towards this single point in time in the book. And so you know that that event is important, and you also know that like the book is going to probably end at that event. And then that point is going to be like the basis that drives like a longer series down the road, but that like it's almost like this book is a prologue to that point. I think that is just based on how I am reading this book. Again, like I said, I don't know how the rest of the series is going to play out. And this is a little bit tough for me because I do kind of prefer series, especially fantasy series, where the books feel at least somewhat like they have a contained arc. And this book does have a contained arc, but like you still clearly need to read more to figure out a lot of the stuff that's going on in here. Like I've read fantasy series where like, you know, there is a full arc in the story and there might be a few threads loose that are going to be picked up later, but like you have a very contained arc in the story. And that is a personal preference. That is not a judgment on stories that don't do this. It's just that that is my personal preference. And City of Brass, I think, is more on the opposite end, where you really do need to read the rest of the books in the series to get any sense of closure with anything going on in the books. Like, you are not going to get any sense of like a complete end if you just read the first book. Black Sun, I think, manages to kind of thread the needle a little bit better for me, like where even though it is more on that end, where it is more like I feel very much like I'm going to need to read the rest of the series to understand what the events of this book actually mean, because of the way it's structured, because it is a very tightly structured around this like particular event. It was less frustrating for me, and also because there are things that Rohnhorse does with her like kind of outline of like how she's playing with time and structure, that like things connect back to the beginning in a really interesting way that like I didn't appreciate until the end. So if you are someone like me and you are someone who will like put off reading a series until you know that there is some sense of like, I don't know, a completeness, even if like the series isn't complete, but you will get that complete sense of a story at least. If you are like that, I would still recommend checking out Black Sun, because I don't know, like I said, I am someone who is more on that end, and I still really love the book because I think the way it's structured, it still feels very, very satisfying, even if I know that like there's still so much more for me to learn from this series and from this world. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the books that I currently have checked out that I will be reading over the next few weeks. There are basically two themes going on. One theme is fantasy. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm suddenly in this really strong fantasy mood, but that continues. You could see it from the books I had checked out last month. It continues this month. The second category is going to be a shit ton of nonfiction, just because I am reading stuff for the BookTube prize. I'm judging one of the rounds right now, and so I gotta read a lot of nonfiction, which I'm also really excited about. So we're gonna start with the fantasy, the fiction, the whatever. One of the books I'm gonna be reading is Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is like definitely on my high priority list, especially because I have not read Octavia Butler, which feels pretty bleak. So I'm excited to kind of finally start digging through her books. I put a punch on hold on the library, but I've had to suspend a lot of the holds again because of like pacing needs. But this is what I'm gonna be starting with. Next is A Touch of Stone and Snow by Milla Vane. This is a barbarian romance novel. I talked about the first book in the series in my last library check-in video, and I had some frustrations with it, particularly with like some consenty, violency, icky kind of stuff that's in that book. But when I had like heard about this book, I had heard basically that first book is like that it is frustrating in those ways, but that this book is better. And especially like this is a friends to not friends to lovers story, I guess. There's a friend who put their other friend into exile, but now they have to save their people, and so they come back together and then do their thing. I was really excited for this book because of that premise. It is a weirdly specific premise, the whole exile thing, but it's one that I've been wanting to read. But I also, the more distance I have from the first book and like just the frustrations I had, not just with the consenty stuff, but just like it is very long and repetitive, and there's like a lot of writing things in it that like over time I'm realizing like just like kind of how much of a slog it was to get through at times. That the more I think about that and the more distance I have from like the initial excitement I had of just like, okay, I've got this book, this next book in the series that I've been excited for, that has all made me more like hesitant about actually diving into this book, because I'm just kind of like, I don't know, do I want to deal with it? But I think like I'm just gonna sit down and at least give the first 50 pages a shot and just see if I get into it. If I don't like it, I'm gonna let myself DNF it, because like life's too short. Next is The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. And the reason why I checked this out is actually because the second book in the series was on NPR's 2020 book concierge, like of, you know, books they had really liked from the year. And I was just kind of like, yeah, you know, I've been in a fantasy mood. I think this has like bone magic and stuff in it. Why not give it a try and see if I like it too? I have not actually read it. I haven't actually even read that many other reviews of it, so I'm very curious. If you've read it and if you have feelings about it, let me know down below. And last for the fantasy books is The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden, and I talked about this last time. I talked about how fucking long I've been waiting for this book. It has been in transit to my library for like months, and of course as soon as I like finished filming that video, like it came in. Like, it was like, actually, Debogi, you're a liar now because the book has arrived. So this is the second book in the Bear and the Nightingale series, and I really loved that first book. I thought it was really beautifully written. I really loved the fantasy. I love the magic of it, and I am really excited to delve into this book to see how that series goes. Thinking about this book in the context of what I was saying earlier about fantasy series and like the first book in the fantasy series is interesting because The Bear and the Nightingale is like a first book that I think of as very self-contained. Like, you could just read that book and feel very, very satisfied, but it has a lot of things like open at the end where like clearly she could build a series out of it. So yeah, that's kind of interesting to think about compared, because at first I was like, is that like a new thing in fantasy or not? It's probably something in publishing. Like, I don't know if there's something about what kinds of like series and like publishing deals there are. Like, maybe there's some kind of publishing deals where like you can have more of an open-ended first book versus others. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the publishing deal for this looked like. I'm also talking out of my butt because I don't know anything about publishing, you know? Like, I don't know the business of publishing. So if any of you guys have insight into like why some fantasy series start with like a more of an open-ended kind of thing and others don't, I am interested in hearing more, because it also could just be that that's like the way the authors envisioned it. And so now I'm curious, like, is this just me like lording my preferences over like authors and what they write, which is not entirely fair. Okay, moving on to the nonfiction books that I'm reading right now. Again, these are all books that I am reading for the BookTube prize. So the first is the address book, What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power by Deirdre Mask. It's about addresses. It's about what they reveal about identity, race, wealth, and power. And that is what I will be learning. Next up is Intimations by Zadie Smith. This was written during like the initial months of lockdown, so it is written like at a very salient time. Like, there's a lot about it, like just like that like initial kind of aspect to it that I think will be curious. And also this will be my first Zadie Smith that I've read, which I'm excited for because she's another author that I've been wanting to read more of. It's also a very thin book, so I'm not gonna lie, that is sort of a relief looking at like some of the other books that I'm going to be reading about, even though I assume it will also, despite its like thinness, will also be very substantial in terms of thought in the writing going into it. Next up is Surviving Autocracy by Masha Gessen. Masha Gessen has written some books about Russia and Putin that I've been really also wanting to read. It is also, of course, a thing to be reading about autocracy in the year 2021, coming off of everything that has been going on politically in the US for the past year, the past 4 years, the past 200 years. And last, but certainly not least, is Just Us, An American Conversation by Claudia Rankin. I think this is going to be a heavy book, both like emotionally, but also just like physically. Like, it is a heavy book because it has like very, very glossy pages. Like, it is clearly like a lot of thought has been put into like just like the presentation of the book, down to like the images, down to the kind of paper that's being used. Like, I had read Citizen by her like a couple of years ago, and she clearly puts a lot of thought into like how she is going to convey her message and how it's not just going to be like based strictly on one form. And I really liked that about Citizen. It's something that I found like challenging and like learned a lot from. And so I am excited to see that kind of like expanded upon in Just Us. It's hard to say like excited in the context of a book that is clearly not a book that I am going to like come out of feeling like, I don't know, excited about humanity, but like I am excited for the experience of reading it and learning from it, just like I did with Citizen. So those are the books that I read over the last few weeks, the books I will be reading over the next few weeks. And yeah, let me know if you have thoughts about any of these books, if you think there are any that I should prioritize, if you think there are other Octavia Butler books that I should definitely make sure to like bump to the top of my list. I don't know, anything that you want to suggest based off of these books, I am open to. So thank you guys for watching. Bye.